computer. Okay. Okay. Are we recording? Yes, we are. Okay. Welcome for those following along at home. Today we are going to, we're going to finish up this week. I think we're going to cover the last section in the LinkedIn Learning Rails 6 course. And he talks about basically more CRUD actions. He goes into detail, and that's what we'll do, is just sort of go into detail on index, show, update, create, all the specific CRUD actions, talk about form, sum, strong parameters, that kind of stuff. And then maybe this won't take the whole time, Greg, so maybe we'll look at the Vetsu Code app and some of the updates.
Yeah, I'd like that. Thanks.
Some of the updates I did there. Okay, so let's just jump right in. So first off, let's look at the read actions. Both of the read actions are index and show, right? Again, if you're looking at the LinkedIn video, basically what he does is does those from scratch rather than using scaffolding, which is a really great way to do it. You know, it really shows you, just gives you the granular detail, all the stuff that the Rails magic does when you use scaffolding and you're writing it out by hand. So it's just a good opportunity to walk through that. I'm not going to go through each one of those, but we are going to look at each one. So for instance, let's start with the index view. So our index view is a get. It's a get action from an HTTP standpoint. You're doing an HTTP get, and generally you're just getting all of the whatever the model info for that particular index call is. The cohorts action, and we'll let me get my Rails. Let me get my server started here. So just to remind you all, we've got a pretty simple setup in our Vetsu Code recruit tracker app, and we've got basically users, and users, if you recall, belong to cohorts. And let's get logged in here. That's good. Okay, and so in this case, we've got a single cohort here. Let's create a new one. So let's say it starts in June, maybe ends in August. Cohort. We'll create cohort. Okay, so when we talk about our index view, this is what our index view looks like, and essentially it's just a list of all of a particular model for that index view. In this case, it's going to be for the cohorts model. We've got two cohorts. Notice our URL up here, we're calling /cohorts. If we look at our web server, just so we can see what the call looks like, here we can see from our cohorts controller, we're calling the index action. We look at our SQL that's being done, select all or select star from cohorts. Okay, let's look at the index view. So this is what our index HTML looks like. So again, this is an ERB. We'll talk a little bit about ERB later, but essentially ERB again is embedded Ruby embedded inside just a standard HTML form. So obviously we won't get into the HTML. All that should be fairly straightforward. The sort of important thing is here, we've got this at cohorts.each do, and then we're going to loop through. So essentially this is looping through each table or each cohort in the cohorts table, each row in the cohorts table, and then displaying the various attributes here. In this case, name, start date, end date, description, and then of course, these are all the things you see here: name, start date, end date, description. Also, if you remember, we've got an active flag too. So that's basically all that does. And again, we can modify this. We can add and remove things. That there may be some fields in the database that we're not interested in displaying on the in this index view. So again, you would modify that here. Inside our cohorts controller, our index action here, this controls this at cohorts variable. In this case, we're just grabbing all. This is what that cohort.all does. It just grabs all cohorts that's in the database and assigns them to this at cohorts variable. This is an array, And then we're displaying, again, back in our index view, this is that same at cohorts variable here. So this at cohorts.each just allows us to loop through that array. Just for a little different view, if we look at the users, if we look at our users view, notice our index actions. This is a good example. Again, that cohorts view we just looked at, that's a very standard, just using the scaffolding to build out a model inside Rails. And for our purposes inside our application, that standard cohort.all works fine. Our index view for our users was a little different though, right? For our recruit tracker app inside Betsu code, we've got an admin flag. We want that admin to have a slightly different view and to have access to all users, as opposed to those users that don't have the index flag. In our case, it's going to be recruits. The recruits are going to have a limited view. In fact, they should really be able to view their own profile and their own users, the only thing they're going to be able to view. So in this case, we can see that's what we're doing inside the index view. We've got a simple if statement. It says if current user, we've got an isAdmin function inside our user model. If that returns true, then in this case, users is going to be get current cohort, and the current cohort is going to be all users that are that have a relation to the active cohort. And then we've got a simple else statement that is going to redirect. So if someone's not an admin and they try to go to this path, this user's path, we're going to redirect them back to the welcome path and simply put this not authorized notice on the screen. And then also notice we've got this before action here. This is really what controls their access. This is what controls their ability to be able to view the users, view that user's index profile. Notice we've got this authorized method, and I think we've got that set up in our application controller. So yeah, we've got an authorized method here that redirect less current users nil. So if someone's not logged in, they won't be able to view that path. Okay, all right. So that is the index view. Any questions, Greg, about the index view?
No, thanks for walking through that.
Okay. So, and then let's look at show. So both of these are read actions. So again, they're GET requests from an HTTP standpoint. We're thinking about these are GET requests, but obviously show is a little different in that we're showing an individual record. So again, if we go back to our cohorts model, and if we click the show method here, so notice the index view or index action, the URL is just /cohorts, as opposed to if we look at a particular one, notice we're passing the ID of that cohort in there too. And then if we look inside, let's start off with the view. So our show view looks something like this here. We've got name, start date, end date. So again, sort of very similar to what our index view was. But again, remember in our index view, we had a loop there. We were looping through each of the cohorts and then showing the individual attributes. In this case, obviously no loop, because we're looking at a single ID or a single cohort in this case. And show looks like that. Let's see, in our cohorts controller show action. So in LinkedIn video, when you were sort of hand coding things, you actually had a find statement that's being done, and you had to find the individual cohort by ID. The reason we're able to get around that here and not do that here is because we've got this set cohort. We've got this set cohort before action that's set up inside the controller. And basically that takes care of finding a specific, finding that ID for us. So again, the before action is set cohort. We go down at the bottom and look at set cohort. Here we see that at cohort equals cohort.find, and then there's your parameters or your params ID there. And again, if we look inside the console to view what's actually going on here, you can see our get requests. In this case, we're finding slash cohorts 1. And then here's our parameters here, got with the ID of 1. And then we can see our SQL statement where we're finding a particular cohort where the ID is equal to 1. Okay, so that is the show action. Okay, let's look at, okay, let's talk about forms. So we've talked quite a bit about forms up to this point. Again, the sort of default forms within Rails are ERB templates, which are embedded Ruby. So there's a lot of other, in fact, you know, there's a good debate that's still out there. It's been there for years about views within, about using other views outside of ERB within Rails. So there's Haml, it's fairly popular, and Slim. In fact, I would say still, and that's been that way for the last decade or so. Haml, which is which is HAML, Haml, and then Slim, and I think it's just .slim, and I think maybe less, maybe one you can use too, but they're just other view frameworks that you can use within Rails to build out views, and they're more, at least from a syntax standpoint, they're syntactically more concise than what ERB templates are. I'm still an ERB guy. I mean, there's various reasons why I don't like some of the other. I can't remember if it's Haml or Slim. One of them, I think Haml is white space dependent. I just generally don't like white space dependent code. So that's just my own, but I mean, I'm sure it's like anything else. I would get used to it if I use it on a regular basis. But again, I generally like the standard Rails out of the box ERB templates for views. Now, that being said, I have seen some, you know, when views start to, the more sophisticated views get, the sort of maybe, you know, less you're going to like ERB templates, just because, again, the syntactic sugar that some of these other view frameworks give you, you know, does sort of make it more concise. I mean, when you get into views that are 100 lines, 150 lines long, you know, if you can cut that number in half and sort of
at all,
things out some, you know, yeah, it does help. But I'm still, I mean, I've worked with some fairly sophisticated apps where we're still using ERB templates, and I still prefer that over Slim or Haml. So it's really to each his own there. I mean, I will say the other thing is that, again, this idea of working with others and being able to collaborate with other folks, you know, adding another specific view framework like that is just one other technology, one other potential new technology that another developer may have to learn. Whereas I would argue all Rails devs know ERB. So I think there is an advantage from that standpoint. So yeah, but again, as far as our ERB templates go, you know, allow for embedded Ruby. Again, we put any code we want. We just put them inside this these carets with the %, and just put your Ruby code inside there. If you recall too, whether you have an equal sign there or not determines whether it's actually displayed inside the view. There's some cases where you just want to process the code. You don't want to actually display it on the screen. So that's what the equal sign does. So another thing that Rails standard ERB forms give you is allows you to use form helpers in Rails. So a good example of that is the form with helper, and we can look at that inside _form. So again, we're looking at our cohorts model that was built with standard scaffolding. So I think we'll talk about partials next time, but I will say a word about this. So notice the name of this file has an underscore in front, and an underscore means that it's what's called a partial inside Rails. And what this is essentially shared code. This allows you to share this form and access it from other files within this same view. So in this case, if we look at new, we look at the new form, notice we're calling this render function here. And again, these things, like when we talk about form helpers in Rails, all of these, all of this Ruby code, all of these like render, link to, form with, form for, all those things are what's called form helpers inside Rails. And they're basically shortcuts. I mean, when you think of all the stuff you do in HTML, they essentially allow you to do all the things that HTML would allow you to do. You can just do them inside of a sort of a Rails context. But notice here we're calling this render function, then we're calling form. So what this is actually doing is when we load up new, so if I do new cohort, so I'll do back and I'll do new. So this form you see here, again, note our URL is cohort/new. We're actually looking at this form here. So notice you see the back, and then you see no new cohort up top. So here's that back code is here, and then here's new cohort here. And then all of this you see in the middle is actually this underscore form. So notice we've got the form with, this is I think this was new in Rails 5. I think Rails 5 and previously it used form 4, but essentially this form with loop, notice you've got this do form, and then form.label, form.text field, form.label, form.date select. Each of these things is sort of a different HTML method or HTML display inside the form. So a text field is just that. So if we look at the name here, that's displaying a text field. Notice these start date and end date are both this date select. So that's what gives you this this year, month, and date, and you can change these formats up if you want. Notice we've got a display field here, which is actually a text area. And obviously the only difference in text area and text field is one is sort of the paragraph size box versus just sort of a single field. Notice we've got this form for check box. That's what gives you the check box here. So again, these are all sort of standard HTML functions that you would find to build HTML pages. It's just sort of the Rails way or the Rails implementation of that. Okay. Questions about any of that?
No.
Okay. And then params is the other piece. And again, we talked about, for instance, viewing. Again, if we view a cohort, and if we go back to our Rails server and look, notice we see this parameters here. So this idea of parameters in Rails is really just a way to sort of pass information and data around between your forms and your controllers. And some of this might be, or most of the time, this is going to be database, data that either the user is being input, that the user is going to input, or is being called back via get functions or something like that. And then some of it can be dynamic data too. And an example of that is one of our requirements for our Vetsu Code app, and I've added that, was we want to add when we send, anytime a profile status changes, we had talked about adding some text there. And so what this optional text to be emailed to recruit, you see I've got the little hint there for it, is whatever's put in this box, you can leave it blank if you want, or if you add text here, it's actually sent along and included in the email. So this text will be added to the email. And again, just to give you the context of this, the idea is here is an admin, one of the volunteers for Vetsu Code is going to be reviewing profiles, and then they may change the status based on if it needs more work. And just so you can see, these are the various status here, but let's say it needs more work. When we click the change status button, an email notification is going to go to the recruit, letting them know that the status has changed. Number one, the status has changed, what the new status is, and then any text that's added inside here is going to be appended to that email. And so if we click change status, so here's what the email looks like. So in this case, hi Mary, your profile status recruit tracker has changed. In this case, it changed to need more work. And then here's the additional comments here. And then this idea of params, I wanted to show you too, that text should be a param that was added on. And so yeah, here, so here's the post request. So when I clicked that change status button, again, in this case, I've got a change profile status action inside the user's controller, but here are the parameters that are being passed on. So in this case, the ID, this is the ID of the user. In this case, notice this, the status is going to be passed along as a parameter because that's what's going to change. And then here's the comments here too. And notice those comments were sort of appended to this post request. And then of course that's what gets included inside the email. And just so you can see it inside the view, that's sort of another important piece. So this would be apps views. Let's go to users and then show, I think is where that lives. Yeah, I mean, this is a fairly sophisticated. So again, this idea of form helpers, I'm using the form tag method inside Rails. I'm calling this change profile status path. So that's what links it up to the change profile status action inside the controller. Here I'm specifying this post. Again, this is an HTTP post request. And then key value, user profile. Looking for the comments. So here's the here's the text area that I added right here. I was thinking I added. So I think that's what this key value does in this place. Well, that's just the statuses. Yeah, I was thinking I would see the comments. I was thinking I would see the comments params here specified, but they're not. But I think basically the view takes care of that. When you click the submit button, based on what we see in the view, it gets sent on as a part of the post request. Okay, but anyway, this idea of the params key and parameters inside Rails is going to be key, is going to be sort of center stage for this idea of controller and view actions that take place. Okay. All right, let's talk about the new action. So again, so that was index and show. Both of those are get requests, although we've started to look at some submissions, some form submissions, which are post requests. Same thing is going on with new with our create actions inside Rails, and both of those are the new and the create requests. So let's look at what creating a new cohort looks like. So in this case, let's start off with the view, and let's do app views. And so we'll start off with new. So again, this new action takes advantage of our form partial. So if you remember previously, we looked at that with
in that line 3 there on that new view. Says render form and then cohort. That at cohort, is that telling where to get the data or where to send it?
That's telling where to get where to load the I think where to get the
form.
Yeah, where to get the form from. And in fact, if we let's look at underscore form. So here you can see this is where the model.
Yeah, that model. Yep. Okay, got it.
And but I think what that actually does, Greg, is that's getting any data that's already there. So in the case of the edit, let's see what the edit action looks like. Yeah, same thing with the edit action here. When we're rendering the new form, I mean, I think, I'm just curious if we left this off. I kind of think it would still work, but let's see. So let's go to recruit tracker, and we go to cohorts, and we go to new. No, doesn't quite work. But I think what that's for is it actually doesn't load anything when we do new form like this, because again, this is new. There's not anything already there. However, if we leave, let me see, let's see what happens if we do this. I'm going to make this active. What I want to do is, what I want to happen is I want an error to be thrown. I want it to have to reload this page. And the reason I'm doing that is, okay, the reason I wanted to test that out is, notice this summer of 2021, we didn't lose, right? It's still there, even though this, even though this is this form hasn't been saved in the database anywhere. Any settings that we've already got, if the form fails, it reloads that. And I think that's what this at cohort actually does here. And now again, this is in the case of new. Now in the case of edit, again, in the case of edit, we're calling that same underscore form. But if you notice, if we go to cohorts and we do edit, notice it loads the data that's already been saved in the database there. So I think that's the purpose of that at cohort. And again, depending on whether which action you're calling, it works a little different for both of those. It works a little different for both of those things. So again, new again takes advantage of this underscore form. And again, if you looked at the LinkedIn Learning video he did, he was basically hard coding for each one of these forms. If you go back and look at that, there's a lot of duplicate code there. So obviously what we're going for here is this dry concept inside Rails, which dry is DRY, do not repeat yourself. And so what this does is gives you a single place for, we can have this form partial here, and we can load it in various places. If we need to modify that, if we need to add a field, or let's say we wanted to remove a field or modify this in any way, we've got a single place where we can change it, and it's going to affect both. It's going to affect both new, edit. So I guess new and edit are the only ones that.
Right, but you could use it in different places.
But you could use it in other places. I was
Right.
going to say, just
And-
as as you get more sophisticated views, there may be other places you're going to be calling that. So the idea is you've got a single place, you've got a single file where you can make those edits and change them rather than having to make changes in multiple places. Let's see. So we looked at new course path, and then let's look at the new action in the controller. So we sort of cover that side of things. Cohorts controller. So, you know, the new action is pretty simple here. All we're doing is creating a new cohort. Now this, in fact, and I think he mentioned that inside the, I'm curious if this will load without, if we comment that out. Let's go to cohorts and we do new. Okay, no, it doesn't. Undefined errors for neoclass. Yeah, so we actually need that there. But one of the points to point out is here, if we wanted any default values set here, I mean, there's a couple of different places from a Rails standpoint. You could do that at database. You could do that in the database. You could set a default value there, but you could also do that here, and you could add some logic here too, based on maybe if a current user's role is 5, maybe you have a certain default action that you want to do for a cohort here, as opposed to if they have a different role, you want something else done. So creating a new cohort as part of this model creation process inside Rails gives you the opportunity to add some different logic here if you want to. So again, this new action is being called here, and then that's what's actually allowing you to load the form. And then we can update that. And then finally, we talked about the template is calling the underscore form partial there. Okay. All right, and then the last one is the
so with that, like form partial, I mean, that's essentially like a class or a module, right? It's the same kind of idea there, right?
Module, yes, I would say. Class, not necessarily, but I again, it's just the idea is that it's shared code, And that again, this idea of a dry, it keeps things dry for you. Now, again, that has its limits depending on how sophisticated your app gets, but generally out of the box, it works fairly well. And the other thing is you can always go back, and if you want the, if you want the new view to look a certain way, you can just remove this render function and just create your own view. So you can change that, at any time.
Right.
Okay. And then the create action was the last one. So again, we've got this new action that happens, and then the create action looks like this. And the create action actually happens when the submission happens. So again, this is what our new action looks like here. And in fact, let's create a new cohort. Let's do new. Maybe let's do fall 2021. Let's say that would start in August and in October test. So let's hit create, and then let's actually see what that looks like here. So here we can see, again, this is our post request that's being made. We're calling the create action inside the cohorts controller. And then again, we can see our parameters that are being sent. So these are all the things that are on that new action or on that new page. In this case, our cohort name, start date, end date, description, and then whether it's active or not. We can see our SQL that's being called there. In this case, we've got a successful commit that happens. If we look at the create action inside the controller, so here's our cohorts.new, and then there's our parameters that are being passed into cohort.new. Again,
and those params, those come out of that private method down below. So are those required? Right. So name, start date, end date, description, active. So validation.
Yeah. Well, so in this case, there's not. In this case, our validation should live inside the model, right? So if we go to cohort.rb, in this case, the only validation that we have for this model is this active validation that I've got. Now, this is a specific one. This is not a required field necessarily. In this case, it's a custom validation that I wrote where we only want a single active cohort at any one time. And just to see that in action, if we go up here to cohorts, notice here's the active status, right? There's only one that's true, and there can be, what that validation says is, hey, there can only be one active cohort.
There can only be one
time. And so, for instance, if I try to change one of these others from false to true, notice then see this is where this validation happens and it fails. And in fact, it's good to see this just so we can go back. Let's go back to our cohorts controller. So if.save, the first cohort, that fall cohort that we created, it was a valid cohort. There were no failures or errors there. So this code path, we took this code path. Now the one we just did where we tried to set one active, it failed. So we had our else statement kick in here. And so of course, what happened is it re-rendered our new action in our new form. And then it's going to this at cohorts dot errors here. It's just displaying whatever the appropriate error message is. So in our case, it was this, the fact that that there was already another active cohort, which came from this error message here. Notice I'm calling this errors.add.
Yep.
So that's sort of how all that works. Now again,
that's all the wiring there.
Yeah, that's sort of all the wiring. And again, this is default, just the sort of scaffolding you get out of the box with Rails. And the cohorts model in this case was a nice one to do because it was fairly straightforward. Now I did add some various authentication pieces to it in the form of before actions. In this case, both the authorized and the application admin before actions here. make sure only admins can see and manipulate cohorts. But other than that, other than adding those things, just to make sure the right people have access to it, it's a sort of standard model view and controller being created with scaffolding. And then yeah, that's really, yeah, there's no view, there's no view associated with create. It's really just the controller action there. Okay, any questions about any of that? We'll cover updates, update and destroy next week, and then also maybe look at strong parameters too on Wednesday.
Yeah, I think the only question I got is, and it'll probably get answered Wednesday, is connecting a user to a cohort now, and how that, like the wiring behind that.
Yeah,
it looks like it's a parameter down below, but I'd like to hear the wiring behind that.
Yeah, sure. And we'll in fact, well, yeah, because we're running out of time. Yeah, I'll make a note of that. In fact, I'll put that in my notes. Let's see, let's do,
because that's what matters, right? Is now that I sign up.
Yeah, right.
You as the admin, you're going to assign me to cohort 1 or 2 or 7, or a year from now, or if something happens, how do I change cohorts? That whole sort of thing.
Yep. User cohort relationship. Yeah. And really the model I did, I mean, yeah, really the model relationships are the important thing there, which is of course has many users, and then has many users and belongs to cohort. Right. But yeah, we'll talk about that on Wednesday. So I added, let's see, we saw, I think the only thing, I mean, I've just sort of generally cleaned up some things. The biggest thing probably feature wise I added again is the ability to, you can add some text here when an admin changes a recruit's status. You can add some optional text that gets emailed. So I haven't heard anything. I shared with Eddie and
yeah, you're reading my mind. I was just getting ready to ask.
I was gonna say, yeah, and I think I included you on that. And Jerome had some issues setting it up, and so I'm curious. I think Yarn is the only thing, because remember we sort of went through we had some pain when I added Bootstrap.
Yeah, there was some follies there with that. And I have since been able to work through those on another project. I had a guy bring up his Windows machine, and we walked through it, and I think I got that egg cracked now, so the docs just work.
Did you? So now, was that the Recruit Tracker app? You had somebody else?
It was similar issue with a different app.
Yeah, I've got an Ubuntu laptop over here that's completely standalone system, and I went in and did the same thing. I just went in and cloned the app, ran bundle. The only additional thing I did was run Yarn, and it worked. Everything loaded fine there, and I didn't have to do any file name. I didn't have to do any file name changes or anything like that. So that was the last thing I asked Jerome to do, was to run Yarn on his machine and see if that fixed it. And I'd like somebody else, if you know anybody else that would be willing to just in fact, and I've updated the README too. So if you know anybody else,
I got somebody.
Yeah, I mean, preferably somebody that's got a Rails environment already set up, and it has everything that they need there. But yeah, just have them clone the repo and then just follow the instructions in the README, which are, they should be able to bundle Yarn and then do, migrate and then seed to create the users and the default cohort, see if they have any issues loading it up. I put feelers out on another Slack team, my local Slack team. I put it in the Rails channel there and ask awesome. If there were any volunteers to just see if they could clone it and run it locally to see if they ran into any issues. But Eddie's sort of the important person. I haven't heard anything back from him, so okay, we'll see. So all righty.
Cool. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, and as far as the issue you're having with your stuff, let me know. I'm happy to look at some code and help you work through, because it'll be good. It's been a while since I've looked at any of that stuff, and Although the other thing is, from a React standpoint, I definitely don't know the React stuff. So I don't know how easy to get the
Well,
development.
and so the
environment
idea
up
is that's totally separate, right?
Yeah.
So the API is just everything inside. What I got to do, I can test using Postman, so I can hit
Hmm.
everything from afar without even touching the front end. Because the idea is, and the beauty of Rails is